United States President Joe Biden is set to make the case for Washington's return to the global stage in a speech to the United Nations in the next hour. It will be his maiden speech to the General Assembly. Mr. Biden will tell world leaders the U.S. is committed to avoiding a Cold War with China.
America is back. That's the mantra U.S. President Joe Biden is bringing with him at his maiden outing as president to the UN General Assembly.
Strong partnership between the United States and the UN is based on common values and principles, and at this moment those bonds are more important than ever.
Mr. Biden will argue that the U.S. is ready to shift towards intensive diplomacy after ending 20 years of war in Afghanistan. China will also be in focus. The president says his drive to deepen the U.S. footprint in Asia doesn't have to mean confrontation with Beijing. He plans to make the case for the world's two major powers to cooperate on global threats, especially climate change. His administration has refuted claims by the UN chief, who ahead of the General Assembly warned that the relationship between both sides was dysfunctional.
First, I would say the president's view and this administration's view is that our relationship with China is one not of conflict, but of competition.
But the U.S. president faces an uphill battle in his quest to restore American leadership, coming weeks after the chaotic withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan. Close ally France is also furious at what it calls backstabbing by Washington over a new defense pact with Britain and Australia.
Well, Dennis Lowe joins us live from the UN in New York. Mr. Biden wants to avoid confrontation with China, but his approach is not likely to quell tensions.
That's absolutely right. And the message we're hearing from members of the Biden administration is that competition does not mean necessarily a lead to civil war, as of course was alluded to in that interview that the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres gave to the Associated Press over the weekend. We're hearing from the State Department and other members of the Biden administration as well that what the US is looking to is to be competitive, but there are still plenty of areas where the likes of the US and China can still have strong relationships going forward. The State Department this week stressing that while there are no bilateral opportunities between members of the US delegation and the Chinese delegation this week here in New York, there will be still plenty of opportunities for multilateral collaboration. That being said, and while the US will certainly be painting a picture that there are so many opportunities for the US and China to work together, namely on the distribution of COVID-19 vaccines around the world. Climate change, of course, another key topic. Noticeable, though, that China was not a part of President Biden's methane summit that he held last Friday virtually in the US. They'll also be keen to note that the fact is that later this week, after the president addresses the UN General Assembly here on Tuesday, later this week, he'll be arranging a group of the Quad, so Australia, India, Japan and the United States. And of course, the growing presence of China in the region and efforts to combat any perceived threats will be a key topic of discussion. So in the minds of many, that could potentially undermine any noises of cooperation we're hearing from the Biden camp.
And, the president also wants to put behind him years of anti-UN sentiment from the previous administration.
Of course, and if we just cast our minds back a couple of years here at the United Nations General Assembly Hall, when then President Donald Trump said that the future belongs to patriots, not to globalists, we'll be hearing a very different message from President Biden. We're expected to hear him saying that essentially the United States is closing a chapter on 20 years of war in Afghanistan, opening a new chapter of intense diplomacy. Now, while we can expect to hear a strong message that the US is committed to multilateralism, there'll be some eyebrows raised from members of the international community, especially considering the fact there are several high-profile instances where even key allies believe perhaps that's not quite the case. There's, of course, that deal between the AUKUS deal between Australia, the US, the United Kingdom, of course, infuriating France and members of the European Union. Many allies felt they were blindsided when it came to the Biden administration's decision to relax travel restrictions on a number of nations just on Monday. and, of course, the US withdrawal from Afghanistan that left many allies scrambling. So they'll be certainly looking for guarantees that the US is committed to multilateralism. Of course, the US is hosting a summit on how to put the COVID-19 pandemic behind us on Wednesday. What many allies will be looking for is tangible evidence that the US is, in fact, putting into place those commitments to multilateralism.
Yeah, thanks for keeping an eye on it for us. Will Denslow there from the UN in New York.